Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share and discuss resources, tools, and information to equip leaders to build creative, cohesive teams through culture and leader development. Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Natasha, and today I am sharing a conversation that I had with transition coach Dan Savage on programs for people transitioning out of the military, coaching through uncertainty, and the power of a strong network. Good morning. I'm going to start by having you introduce yourself and tell us your style of coaching.
Sure. So my name is Dan Savage. I'm the VP of Community at Shift or shift.org. There's multiple shifts, so we're easier to find if I always make sure to list out the URL. I don't know that I have a style of coaching. I would say that, the work that when I was thinking about this in advance of our conversation, I don't think of myself as a coach in the same sense that maybe someone who does it professionally thinks of themselves as a coach, right? My coaching is typically, I think, done more in sort of like less structured or informal settings, right? So one-on-one conversations with students in our courses, or almost every weekday, I do a veterati mentorship call with a veteran. I think of, coaching as being a part of my leadership style with the team that I lead. And so I don't know that I have sort of a label to it, right? A structured approach to it, as much as maybe the label is informal, right? I just kind of try to weave coaching or a coaching approach into, most of my interactions throughout my day.
I'm really big on the concept of leader as coach, which is, it doesn't always have to be a very formal setting where you do entry and contracting and, you're moving kind of through this framework. But instead, sometimes you only have 5 minutes, or the interaction just is not as formal as that. So with leader as coach, it really is, it can be informal, but it's very like ad hoc, I think I would probably describe it as.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's interesting with I have had some, just sort of as a hobby, I got myself some formal coaching training, and it was interesting to see how it's very different when you think about having a long-term coaching relationship with somebody. That first conversation is sort of where you start to structure the interaction, and you start to put some, some scaffolding around how you're gonna be working together, and what problems you want to be working on, and what style of coaching works for you, and whatnot. And a lot of the coaching that I do, like most of my morning conversation, I occasionally will get sort of for lack of a better term, like repeat customers, right? Where people will come back a couple of months later and sign up for another session. But mostly it's one-off conversations. And so that there is no sort of hour-long, who are we and how are we going to interact with each other, kind of get to know you. It all has to happen very quickly, right? And so the night before, I do my best to prepare and, read up on their background and whatnot. But I try to pivot very quickly to, okay, well, I took a look at your LinkedIn profile last night. I'd love to hear more about your journey and how I might be useful. And then typically I just kind of follow the conversation from there, wherever the individual veteran or military spouse, leads me in the conversation.
So you had said that you had done some formal training. I'm always interested to hear kind of how and where people got any type of coaching training. So how did you, or where did you go about getting yours?
So are you familiar with the Coactive Training Institute?
Yes,
CTI?
I love them.
I did their fundamental course. So it's kind of funny. I was on a date with a woman who was a coach, and we were talking about my morning conversations with these veterans. And I said, the work I do really is around helping people find what's next for them, or what their next, career path might be. And I'm just as, ill-formed as everyone in the class is. I'm still, with every passing month or every passing year, every new job, I'm learning more about myself and what my interests are and my preferences. And so I was talking to this who was a certified CTI coach. She had gone through the whole pipeline with them. And we were just talking about my interests and whatnot. And I said, yeah, I think sometimes I think that maybe a later kind of job, I'd like to be a coach, full time. About the program that they have, go through the full on, I think it's like a 4 or 5, kind of typically spread out over a series of months or a year. And I basically just did the 4-day fundamentals course a couple of months ago, actually, via Zoom. I just took a few days off, and it was pretty easy to knock out.
That's awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate the coactive approach to coaching, and I know that's the basis of what Columbia University uses too in their coaching certification program. So CTI it's top notch. So you had mentioned navigating next, and you had mentioned shift in your intro. So tell us, what is shift, what is navigating next, and what is career accelerator?
Yeah, so Shift is this really interesting organization. We're within this broader kind of network of typically nonprofits, sometimes for-profits, but mostly nonprofits that are doing sort of career resources for the military community. Shift is actually a venture-backed startup, and so we were founded in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and we behave very much like our neighbors, if you will, in sort of the tech ecosystem. We do have our own tech platform, but we're not really a tech-forward company at the moment. I think we hope to be in the long run. We think of Shift as basically a career advancement company for current and former members of the U.S. military. And so what that means is basically wherever you are in your military journey, we've got a resource for you. So if you're on active duty and want to stay on active duty, or this program actually is also for Guard and Reserve folks, but the folks that are currently serving, if you will, that want to level up their military career, they're planning to stay in for a series of a handful of years more, if not a full career. They can go through what we call our Defense Ventures program, which basically is where we put them through industry immersions. They get it's essentially they're on TDY from the military, and they get assigned to either a venture capital firm or a startup to learn about sort of how innovation works in Silicon Valley, innovation work, in the private sector and in the startup space, with the ultimate goal of bringing that back to DoD to kind of, seed a culture of innovation in the force, right? So while you're serving, we've got the Defense Ventures program. When you decide to make that transition from military to civilian life, that's really sort of where the Navigating Next program comes in, along with SkillBridge. So for the folks that are listening and are unfamiliar with SkillBridge, it's basically, within the last 6 months of your military service, you can do essentially an unpaid internship at a company that, while you're doing that, the Department of Defense continues to pay your salary and your benefits and everything else. So it's kind of a free tryout for you and a free tryout for the company. We're like a certified SkillBridge facilitator. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but basically we're the matchmaker. But then we run this program called Navigating Next, which is really for people that don't know what they want to do. Anywhere from like 2/3 to about 80% of people who leave the military don't want to continue doing whatever their job was in the military, right? And that's a common misperception that people think, oh, well, you were a truck driver in the military, you can be a truck driver in civilian life, or you were a medic, you can go be a paramedic, right? There's a reason why people are making these life pivots to leave the military. They probably don't necessarily want to do that same career, just in a different outfit, right? And so Navigating Next is a structured program that lasts for 5 weeks, where we basically take people through, frankly, a journey of self-exploration, where we really start with, this process of, okay, this is a big life transition you're about to make. Let's sort of set the stage for your thought process here. Let's put you in the right mindset of, this isn't just like, I got to pick a city and find a paycheck. This is, I need to start thinking about who I'm going to be on the outside of this major institution I've been a part of for years, right? And so we start sort of very heady, very philosophical, where am I in life and what do I want and what makes me tick? And then we kind of bring people through an ever more structured process of lending definition to their general ideas, right? They might think, well, I think I want to be in tech, right? Well, what does that mean? There's so many different ways to do that. So let's drill down. Maybe you want to be in sales. Okay, well, tech sales, there's a bunch of different types of that, right? So how do we keep getting you more and more specific, such that you sort of narrow down, all right, I think I'm really interested in maybe a couple of different career paths. I haven't chosen one yet. And then how do we give you basically the toolkit to evaluate those career options and navigate your way, network your way into the career paths that you're exploring, right? So Navigating Next is, it's not explicitly just for transitioning service members, because there are, veterans who've been out for several years who still don't know what they want, and we welcome those folks into the program. But we definitely sort of think of it as our core like transition program from military to civilian life, to sort of help you figure out, what is this next phase of life going to look like? Once you've made that transition, most people typically require a period of years for them to really start to feel like they're kind of comfortable in their new, civilian shoes, if you will, right? Like they kind of know the ropes out here, and they have a better sense for, they've maybe tried on one or two jobs. They kind of know what lane they're in, but often they still feel behind, right? So someone who spent 10 years in the military might start a new job at some company right next to someone who has spent those past 10 years actually doing that specific job. They're the same age, they're probably the same level of maturity, but they're definitely not peers, right? Because one person has 10 years of direct experience, and this other person that comes from the military has had to find a way to translate their experience into their way in this role, right? So they often feel behind their peers for a certain period of time until they sort of catch up and often actually accelerate past them. And so for that, we have a program that we actually call the Shift Career Accelerator. The Career Accelerator really is for folks that are in sort of defined lanes. So right now we have sales and customer operations is one lane, project and program management, software and data. And in this next cohort that actually launches on Tuesday, we're opening up a track for people operations, human resources, and recruiting. It lasts for 4 weeks. Your average Monday is what we call our all hands sessions. And that's where we talk about things that are applicable to all career paths, right? Networking and storytelling and how to nail your interview. And then go into your industry breakout track. And that's where we basically have a series of expert guest speakers that come in and basically talk about how they got to where they are in their training program. And then we have two optional elements of that program. One we call the Communication Value Series, which is really tactical. It's about your profile and your resume and salary negotiations.
So having gone through the Navigating Next, I can also attest to it being, I thought it was so unique from other transitioning programs, where a lot of times they need to tell you about VA benefits and all this other stuff, and that's all very important, yes. But also, they don't help you really look at this, almost like this anxiety about this transition, because it's not as hard or as easy as you think it's going to be. And I think that when you can put words and frameworks and assessments and reflection around that for me made Navigating Next so valuable in my transition process. So that was something that I thought was so unique. So when people think, oh, another transitioning service, no, like this is very unique. And I thought it was very helpful for really helping me be comfortable with what was coming next.
Well, I'm so glad you found it useful. I mean, I think that I spent probably 4 or 5 months from the first time I sort of got the heads up that we were going to be building a program like this. I really looked into all the other resources that were out there, and I wanted to build something that was actually going to be unique and sort of fill a unique space in the market, if you will. And I think that a lot of these lessons are things that I've had to learn through my own, transition. And I learned that, so many people, I mean, it's kind of I don't know, ironic isn't the right term, but my first job out of the military after I went to grad school, I was working at Syracuse University at their Institute for Veterans and Military Families. And I was doing all this research. And one of the things that I found, because I was literally sort of going through the transition while I was studying it, if you will. And it was just sort of really interesting to me from like almost an academic perspective to just think, as I was interviewing people, as I was interviewing nonprofits and learning about the work that they did, I was just sort of stunned that I realized, like, wait a minute, I'm not the only one that feels this way. Like, everyone feels like this. And I think that the nature of transitioning from military to civilian life is that, you're the one, literally, the actual like mechanics of it, your whole unit is not getting out with you, right? Like, you're the one who's choosing to leave. And so in many ways, you start to become, whether intentionally or otherwise, the social dynamics are, you start to become isolated from the people that you've, in some cases, literally fought alongside, right? And served alongside for a long time. You start to become the other because you're the one that's kind of leaving the tribe, and they're all going to continue on. And so that can, like, in and of itself, just like the core definition of what this process is very isolating. And we really wrestle with these questions around, well, am I doing the right thing? Am I headed in the right direction? Even when you're on your base, you might go to, an on-base military transition program that, has other people that may be of all different ranks and all different specialties and everything. And so you can often feel like you're alone, even though you're among others, in that, several day workshop that's mandatory for you to go through. My real fervent hope is that they understand that they're not alone, right? And that everyone who goes through this process feels the same way that they are. It's just not a thing we typically talk about. And so I think there's a real power in putting people into a cohort of other people that are also navigating this ambiguity together, to realize that when you're feeling uncertain or you're feeling like you haven't found your fit yet, you shouldn't beat yourself up over that. You shouldn't, I think I sort of like blamed myself, or I looked inward and thought, well, there must be something wrong with me because I don't know what I want to do. And I felt like I was probably the outsider that everyone else has it figured out and I'm clueless here. And the reality of the situation is that no one knows what they want next, almost. Like the idea that someone actually does have a really clear sense of their next steps, that's more of an anomaly than it is, the rule, if you will, out here in civilian life. And so, yeah, ultimately, I think that's why it's so different than other transition programs, is that we do really, while we cover, other programs cover networking, other programs, perhaps do elevator pitch or whatever. I think we really try to get to the core of really understanding yourself. And by doing so, you can be much more authentic in your storytelling, and you can be much more genuine in your networking approach to build really authentic relationships, as opposed to relationships maybe born out of vulnerability, where you're thinking, well, I don't know what I need to do or what I'm going to do, and I need a job, so I need to go meet people, right? It's much more authentic and lasting if you're building relationships with people and storytelling from a place of self-knowledge than from a place of vulnerability.
Absolutely. And I think that in the military, no matter where you go, whatever job that you either are assigned to or that you get billeted for or whatever, you really figure it out. So it kind of puts you in this space of, I could probably do most things. And I remember one of the first things us kind of talking about in the Navigating Next was like, you don't want to like be scattershot with how you're looking at jobs and how you're applying for jobs. Coaching and helping people navigate through that is, building on what you had just said, is really important too, because we're like, I can do anything, and also I just need something. So there's that fear.
Yeah, I think that it is somewhat counterintuitive. I think that the structure and the approach to assigning people to billets and whatnot, the way that the military does talent management really does reward generalists, right? It really does reward those people that can be plopped into any organization, any situation, and figure it out. I distinctly remember one day, when I was deployed in Baghdad, and we were in our area of operations, there was a power plant. And, I was an infantry officer and I studied economics at West Point, right? And my company commander said, all right, well, we need to figure out like how the power system works around here, right? And I had no qualification for this whatsoever. And you just do what it takes to try to figure it out, right? That kind of flexibility is not just rewarded, but it's absolutely necessary in the military, because there is so little predictability often with regard to what environments you're going to be in. And so I think that we tend to think that that's an asset when we leave. And I don't want to say that, I consider myself a generalist still. And so I don't want to sort of, I don't like dump on the idea of being a generalist. But when you're in a job search and someone asks you, maybe you're talking to a recruiter at a company before, and they say, well, what do you want to do? And you say, well, I could do anything. That's actually the exact opposite of what that recruiter needs to hear. There's this mindset shift in terms of how we think about what is actually happening when we're applying for a job, where we tend to think, well, this interaction is I get the job or I don't get the job, right? It's like me or no, right? They accept me or they reject me, right? And the reality of the situation is the process has almost nothing to do with you. It's a competition between you and many other people. Mm-hmm. And in order to be the one who wins, you need to be the one who has, some real genuine and convincing conviction around the idea that you're the best person for that job, which requires you as a generalist to find the element of your background that is specifically relevant to this thing. And so it is a bit counterintuitive for our community, because we tend to think that, well, our strength is that we can flex and do whatever it is that's assigned to us. And again, that specificity is key if you really are ever going to sort of, win that job hunt competition. And like you said, I think when you're thinking about applying for jobs, if you are just sort of scattershot and like seeding the world with your resume, hoping that it's going to land on fertile ground somewhere, you're very likely to lose. The reality of the situation is, the more specific you are, the more successful you'll be. Because if you really tell somebody, well, I'm interested in this type of role at this type of company in this geo, well, now you can go on LinkedIn and find someone in that role, in that company, in that city. But if you say, well, I can do anything, it's like, well, what search are you going to put into Google to say what jobs you have? I could do anything, right? That's just not at all helpful. And so I think that's another thing, as you highlighted, that it's really critical for us to make sure that our community understands that that's a mindset shift that they need to go through if they're going to be successful in this process.
Absolutely. And as far as, the generalist versus specialist thing, I remember a mentor said this to me. He stole it from somewhere else, but he was talking about how when you develop, you need to develop like a T so that you're a generalist in most areas of an area. For example, like I am very passionate about learning and development. And so I know a lot of things about learning and development, but then the long part of the T, that's where my leader development piece is. And so I know the most about that. So I think if people can kind of look at how they develop, and yes, like you need to be a generalist, and there are great things the military does provide you, right? The discipline to learn things, the flexibility to be able to maneuver, but that doesn't mean you should be able to maneuver from finance to people experience or something like that, right? I think that's too big of a flex in the civilian world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there is some real nuance to this conversation, right? Like there's a book that's been, I forget, it came out in the last year or two called Range that I haven't yet read, that I've been hearing a lot of great things about, the power of being a generalist. When I think of the difference between a generalist and a specialist, I think, I'm a generalist in the sense that like, I don't know how to code, right? Like I'm not an expert in corporate finance. I'm not, how I couldn't design a house or a structure of any kind, like I'm not an engineer, but, I do think that sort of my specialty is in this lane of career development, right? Like this is an area where I have a lot of knowledge, whether it's just from my own life experience or the work that I've done at LinkedIn and at Syracuse and now at Shift. And so my generalist skill set gives me the ability to, in my role, I essentially manage to put this in sort of, tech marketplace terms, like I manage the B2C side of a two-sided marketplace, right? The consumer side of a multi-sided platform. And what that means is that I have to know a little bit about marketing. I have to know a little bit about product management. I have to know a little bit about sort of how the analytics platforms work, so that when someone on my team shows me, hey, this is the funnel. When someone's coming through our application, they're going from this page to this page, and this is the drop-off rates and everything else, right? I have to know enough about so many different things that, my generalist skill set, it is very broadly applicable. With that, I'm definitely in a lane, right? Because I have an area of expertise, which is career development and, sort of like life path discernment and all that stuff, which is the expertise I've defined over time. And so I think when people hear me talk about, you need to be super specific, I don't mean necessarily that you have to say, hey, I'm a Six Sigma black belt and process efficiency is the thing that I care about. Well, that could be a thing that's in your toolkit, but it doesn't have to be the one thing, right? You just have to kind of pick, well, within that, maybe you're interested in, I don't know, you can apply that to the construction industry. You could apply that to government work. You could apply it to all sorts of different things. And so it's just helpful, the more specific you can be about kind of the lane that you want to be in.
As people are either going through a military transition or looking to shift careers, or even just kind of that state of uncertainty of, I'm not sure exactly what it is I want to do, how can they go about finding a transition coach or an organization and a program like Shift has?
That's a great question, I think, because this whole idea of coaching is actually relatively new to me, to be honest. I'm only new to sort of learning the difference between a coach, a mentor, and a therapist. I mean, frankly, if I were just approaching, this is probably the caveman answer to your question, but I just go to Google, and it's so amazing to me sometimes how you can Google really vague things and Google will always find it, right? And so I would maybe go in and do a search for coach for life transition or coach for career transition and see what I found, We may talk to that first person and then think, okay, this is the one now. This is like the person I've been assigned to. You got to find somebody who's like a personality click with you. And, some coaches are going to be more conversational. Some coaches are going to provide more actual feedback and advice, whereas other coaches might be more of they sort of find ways to make you do the work and ask you to do all the reflection and sort of find ways to pull the answers out of you, right? At the beginning of our conversation, we were talking about the nearly daily mentorship calls that I have with veterans. In my approach there, I think I'm probably more of a consultant than a coach, to be honest, because they're often coming to me for advice and I'm just sort of sharing things that I've learned with them, more so than asking them to sort of pull that out of themselves. I don't know that I am an expert in sort of like the initial search for a coach, but once you've got your list of options, you definitely want to take several for a test drive before you feel like you're really a good match.
I completely agree. And I think it's such a good point too, that if you and a coach, you're talking with a coach and there's not a match there, you can just say that. Like, you do not have to continue on with that coach. You're not married, right? Like, just, you can move on to the next person. Nobody's feelings are going to hurt because they probably felt that there wasn't a connection either. You have to get from coaching what you can and find a coach that can provide what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right that you're not married. You're also, it's not dating, you're not going to hurt someone's feelings if you say, you know what, I think I'm looking for someone with a different style. That's totally acceptable and happens all the time.
Also, we've mentioned it a couple of times here, the power of networking, if you will. And as I was going through and talking with different people, either through Veterati or through Shift or through Hiring Our Heroes, it was so funny because your name kept coming up as someone who was just phenomenal at networking. And then when I saw you in the first Shift class, I was like, that's the guy. Why is it so important to build a strong network? And what are some of the tips that you have to maintain your network?
Well, so I'm going to play coach here. I'm going to turn this back to you. What is it that you see about me and my approach that you think is most useful?
I see you as a really great connector. And that is something that actually led to the fellowship that I'm in right now, because you connected me with Catherine through the Shift course. So there's that big connection piece, but also I think for me, because I saw how generous you were with your time, whether it was going through my LinkedIn profile or all these, like the extra conversation at the end of the Navigating Next classes, that also made me want to stay connected just to see how I could then add value back to you and what you were doing.
I was fishing for compliments by asking you that, I guess. Well, the reason I ask is because I think that, to be honest here, it's not anything I did intentionally. And I think that's why it's effective. Because I've been told by others, that they've sort of noticed that I'm just really good at managing relationships with within the veteran space, with any professional community, there are people with different perspectives, and there are some people that don't get along with others and everything. And I've been told before that people have noted that I get along with everyone, and I find a way to sort of manage all those relationships. And to me, I think the thing that makes me perhaps effective is maybe the fact that I don't really have clear goals out of my relationships. Like, I just like to help people. I think that there's a way to network that feels like what most people think when they hear the term networking, right? Like, most people hear the term networking, they think it feels kind of slimy. They think it feels transactional. They think it feels self-serving. And I absolutely have seen people in my career that have that approach, and it just does not at all resonate with me. And so to me, I think I really get a lot of intrinsic value out of connecting people to resources and to each other, and to, connecting you with Catherine, the good karma feeling of I helped somebody, and all I had to do was, email two people and say, hey, you two should know each other, and here's why, right? And so I think that, when we think about networking, and this is a module that I teach now in our Career Accelerator course, I think about sort of three different archetypes, if you will. And I'd love to hear if this resonates with you, because I'm still sort of testing out this language to see if it makes sense. But within this like space of networking and relationship management and stuff, there's kind of like 3 different phases that you could be in, and they're not necessarily sequential, but the first is, kind of what I think of as like the hunter, right? These are the people that are like clearly looking for an opportunity, and they're like networking with a purpose. It's like they kind of only get to eat what they kill, right? Like they need a job, and it's entirely on them to sort of like make that happen. And so they're out there very hungry for these new relationships, and so they're networking almost as a project as opposed to as a way of life, right? It's like I have a clear goal, and I need to find the people who can help me get to that goal. And that's very common for people earlier in their careers. I think it's very common for people certainly that are making a major career transition. This transition from military to civilian life is somewhat idiosyncratic in the sense that like there's a finish line and you have to get a paycheck on the other side of that. This is one that like it really does inspire this hunter mentality where it's like, I got to go find an opportunity and I got to make this happen on my way there. The second is more what I think of as like a farmer, right? The farmer isn't starving. The farmer's got a bounty that they planted enough seeds in enough different fields. I think of myself often in sort of this farmer space where like, I'm always looking to meet new people, but not because I think, oh, well, this will get me to XYZ professional finish line, but more just because like I'm always looking to meet new people that are just look at things differently than I do. I'm always trying to expose myself to people that solve problems differently than I do, and people that have different life backgrounds than me, because I'm just a curious person. And so, in my mind, the farmer is like, well, I have planted seeds in a whole lot of fields, and I have people from very many different sort of walks of life and different elements of my own career path that I can call back to, so that almost any student now in one of our cohorts that comes to me and says, well, I'm interested in career field X, I probably know someone who knows someone who can find, who can help them out, right? Not to say that I've been like selfless all along or whatever. When I was younger, I think I was more enthralled by titles, like I wanted to be a CEO. The last persona I think is also one in which I'm currently kind of a fit, which is, I don't know if this term resonates, but I've been calling it like the dieter, right? And what I mean by that is, these are the people that are so busy, that have so much coming at them. There are so many people that are interested in talking to them that they have to say no, that they can put some boundaries in their own life. And, it's like that. But when I was in the military, we had a term when I was deployed that we called leader rest, right? The idea that like, if you run yourself into the ground, you're not going to be helpful to anybody else, right? Mm-hmm. The dieter persona, if you will, is the person who probably, does have a very large network and maybe has a public reputation or something like that. And so there's a lot of people that want to talk to that kind of person. And often those people, at least in my situation, feel guilty because they can't talk to everybody. They just don't have the capacity to respond to every single email or have every informational interview. And so with those folks, I think, whether you're the hunter or the farmer and you're like approaching one of these dieter folks, if you will, like, you kind of have to acknowledge that, like, yeah, maybe they didn't get back to you for a week or two or whatever. And that's not because they're being rude. It's just because they just got a lot coming at them, and you have to be much more cognizant about, you can essentially help people help you, right? If you ask them for a very vague, going to one of these dieter type folks that's not the person to ask to help you brainstorm about your life, right? That's the person to say, hey, can you introduce me to X? Or I'd love to learn your perspective on the specific life experience you went through, or, make it really tactical so that they can help you very easily, as opposed to, hey, can you help me with some very amorphous kind of unstructured ask? That's more for the folks that are closer to you in your network. Honestly, like the farmer approach really resonates with me because it's really effective, because the farmer that has the ability to share their bounty gets some, like I said before, some real intrinsic value out of just the ability to do that. You are, and I apologize for the long-winded answer here, but you're one of multiple people that I've introduced to Catherine, because and the reason why I send multiple people her way is because I have learned about her that she has the same mentality, that she just likes to help, right? She's not going to look at it as a burden. I get to go to bed that night feeling like I did some good, and that's not a thing that many people feel. A lot of people, unfortunately, go through life wondering if anything they've done has mattered, or if they've ever made a positive impact, or, whatever. They, like a lot of us, wrestle with these really deep existential questions, and somewhat selfishly, like, I don't really feel like I have to, because I have this long track record of like, yeah, all I had to do was introduce these two people and someone got a job that was like, they may have never expected they got that before. And I can only take credit for making the intro, but at least I get to feel like I was a part of that story. And therefore, like I said, when I go to bed that night, I don't have to wonder like, well, did I matter? And so I think that's what I get out of it. That's the selfish part.
I really love the 3 archetypes for networking. And yeah, I definitely resonate when I think about different times in my life and kind of what I was working towards. I really like that. I am looking forward to the book you're going to write about it.
I've gotten to a place where, it's just kind of a fluke that all this played out the way that it did in my own career. But like where a lot of people do know my name. And so they want to get on my calendar. And I genuinely feel really guilty often that it's not the healthiest thing for me to stay up until 2 a.m. responding to every single email. And so sometimes I feel quite badly that I can't respond to everybody, and so that's where you got to find ways where it's like, all right, this is the amount that I can do. I've got my day job. I've got my personal life. I'm able to carve out X number of additional hours during the week to just be of service to others. And you do your best to help out, right? I've learned all this stuff basically just through trial and error and through stumbling through my own life. And I think that, one of the things, just to go back to your question about like, if people think I'm good at this, why? I genuinely think that like for better and for worse, I'm not real good at sort of hiding who I am. Like I'm often very like what you see is what you get. And sometimes that works out really well for me and sometimes it doesn't. But I do think that really helps me with relationship management because people generally feel like they can trust me and that there's not really ever going to be an ulterior motive.
How and where can people find you to learn more about you and your work and upcoming Shift and Navigating Next and Career Accelerator offerings?
Yeah, so super easy. I think one is shift.org. I'm easy to find. The name is Daniel Savage. I go by that instead of Dan. It's just conversation. I go by Dan, but there's a famous writer named Dan Savage. And so it's just a little bit easier to find me if you search for Daniel on LinkedIn. Yeah, if you're a veteran or a military spouse and you'd love to have a conversation with me, if you think an hour would be useful, I book all of my conversations via the platform Veterati.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Equipping Leaders. All of the resources mentioned in this episode can be found on my website, natashacheyenne.com. On the website, you can also find a weekly leadership journal entry, a resource page with challenges and downloadable content, a place to sign up for my weekly newsletter, and an upcoming leadership platform full of workshops. You can also follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha and on Twitter and Facebook at Natasha Cheyenne. If you'd like to hear more about a specific topic, please reach out and let me know. Join me next week for another episode.